Hey, you've heard it before. We're a republic, not a democracy. Does it really matter? Perhaps you're already familiar with the saying, democracy is two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner. You believe we should be a republic, but today I challenge you to consider whether or not you really have internalized the difference. If the Constitution says that it guarantees every state a Republican form of government, are you prepared to explain to anybody who asks you exactly where our local government is in Republican form and where it is not? We're so pleased to present to you this special presentation by constitutional scholar Dr. Scott Bradley. He will make us all a little smarter and a little more prepared than we were before we listened to him. All on today's Defending Utah radio and television program.
All right, well, I've kind of been asked to talk about some of the principles of republicanism, and it's a far cry from a party. It's a form of government. And I've taken the title from a statement that you'll see just momentarily that was made at the close of the Constitution Convention of 1787, a republic, if you can keep it. Well, we as a people, I'm not sure why this is not moving forward as it should. Let's try this. There we go. Some time ago, a friend had visited Constitutional Hall in Philadelphia, and they reported to me that the guide who was presenting to the group of the tourists that were there told them that when the convention exited the building on September 17, 1787, after signing the Constitution, Ben Franklin was asked, "What kind of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin?" And he replied, according to the guide, "A democracy, if you can keep it." Well, and so I recently received an email from someone who's been following my presentations on America's founding principles, and she wrote how she was baffled that at the Museum of America in the Smithsonian Mall, there's a huge room that says something like how America became a great democracy. So it's basically a ubiquitous propaganda effort. I don't care if you're listening to the president as he gives his State of the Union address. In fact, I can hardly watch a president's State of the Union address because I get so distracted by how many times they mention democracy, and I'm stroke tallying that, and I miss a lot of the other things that happen. But politicians, everybody, all the talking heads on TV and the radio, textbooks, teachers, professors, talk show hosts, everybody calls it a democracy. And it really is an absolute effort to convince everyone the United States is a democracy. But what's the truth in the matter, and why does it matter? Why are they doing this? The real issue that happened at the close of the Constitution Convention in 1787, Ben Franklin answered, "A republic, if you can keep it." So our good friend Noah Webster, founding father, was there in Philadelphia during the convention, wasn't in the convention, but he had some of the founding fathers over for dinner occasionally and so on. But he discussed in his new dictionary that he created for the country, the term republic. He said a state in which the exercise of the sovereign power is lodged in representatives elected by the people. So it differs from a democracy. They knew what a democracy was. So it wasn't somebody that just kind of got the terminology wrong and anything that they did in those days. They absolutely understood the difference between a republic and a democracy. And we're not going to talk about all the places in the Federalist Papers that it's clearly defined, but they were well understood what they were doing. So in a republic, in our republic, the basis of the republic is law. The law applies to everybody. There isn't a second-class citizenry. There isn't an elite citizenry. It goes to everybody, whether you're in office or out of office, or formerly held office. It's limited to a specific scope. It protects everybody. It is a representative form of government where our trusted representatives only create laws within the bounds of the authority that's delegated to them. We do not give our consent to the governed every time we have an election. That consent was given at the ratification of the Constitution. The limits and bounds were established. Those that take office are basically hired by us to fulfill the assignment given to them under the Constitution. They have no more nor no less power than is specifically identified there. And our consent is to allow them to exercise that power within the limits and bounds that was delegated to them. So it's a written binding contract. Government is defined. All the powers are enumerated. They're listed. You can number them. There's checks and balances. And they've divided and subdivided the powers clearly and distinctly. And they even subdivided the sources of power. So everybody can only operate within the bounds established in the nation's charter, the United States Constitution. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution specifies that every state has to be a republican form of government. We can't have a democracy out there. We can't have any kind of other nuance of any kind of thing but a republican government. It's very specific. They didn't want one bad apple ruining the whole nation because they had a messed up form of government. They wanted everybody to be on the same page. So not that long ago, the fundamental differences of republics and democracies was well understood. Let's go back to 1928, the Army Training Manual. There was a lot of people that went in the military and everybody kind of got fed the same food as well as the same training and the same definitions. And they defined quite accurately democracy as a government of the masses. Authority is derived through mass meetings or any other form of direct expression. And by the way, if you listen carefully, you'll find that this was not an effort to encourage democracy or to sustain or support or in any way, shape or form suggest that the United States was a democracy. Listen to this carefully. In fact, it's rather a denigrating term. They said it results in mobocracy. An attitude towards property is communistic, negating property rights. Attitude towards law is that the will of the majority shall regulate, whether it be based upon deliberation or governed by passion, prejudice, and impulse, without restraint or regard to consequences. Results in demagogism, license, agitation, discontent, and anarchy. It's really interesting that, 90 some years ago, there was a pretty clear definition and understanding for a pretty broad base of the country, in spite of the fact that 10, 12 years before that, Wilson did everything in his power to undermine that understanding. So just a few decades later, there was a great task of redefining the fundamental form of our government. And as I mentioned, that in the military, there's a kind of a mass educational influence of military indoctrination. It would be tempting at this point to talk about the effort to reset our mores based upon this military as kind of a social experiment that is trying to redefine the things of America, our values, attitudes, and beliefs. So, but just 24 years after that 1928 statement, the 1952 Army Field Manual said, democracy, because the United States is a democracy. The majority of the people decide how our government will be organized and run, and that includes the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The people do this by electing representatives, and these men and women then carry out the wishes of the people. Can you see how they've shifted that in that very brief period of time? And it is vast movement since that time. We have not stopped sliding to the left, if you will, if you think about those things. So this definition, though, really quite closely aligns with the communist message, if you will. It's not what the American founding fathers promoted. And were there time, I think we could go through great detail about how the American founding fathers felt about democracy as compared to what a republic is, but we'll just touch upon it briefly. But let's first talk about what Karl Marx said. This is right out of his Communist Manifesto. He stated, "We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy." So there's a battle going on, and they're going to move to the head of it. Here's what Woodrow Wilson said, this is the effort that we spoke of in our mentioning that during the World War I, we must make the world safe for democracy. Well, about that same time, Lenin wrote. It's very telling what the communist leaders wrote at the time this was being promoted by Wilson. Gives you some idea of his, not just his leanings, his roots. Here's what Lenin said: democracy is also a form of state, which must disappear when the state disappears. But this will only take place in the process of transition from completely victorious and consolidated socialism to complete communism. It would be a fundamental mistake to suppose that the struggle for democracy can divert the proletariat from the socialist revolution. On the contrary, just as socialism cannot be victorious unless it introduces complete democracy, so the proletariat will be unable to prepare for victory over the bourgeois unless it wages a many-sided, consistent, and revolutionary struggle for democracy. There we go. Wilson's going to make the world safe for democracy, right? Then Chairman Mao in 1938, and by the way, I might point out that in 1945, the State Department gifted mainland China to Mao, saying, oh, he's just an agrarian reformer. But this statement and the next statement, if that was the only thing that existed about his communistic inclinations, it would be adequate to convict him, I think. He stated, education in democracy must be carried on within the party so that members can understand the meaning of democratic life, the meaning of the relationship between democracy and centralism, and the way in which democratic centralism should be put into practice. Only in this way can we really extend democracy within the party and at the same time avoid ultra-democracy and the laissez-faire that destroys discipline. Then the next year he said, taken as a whole, the Chinese revolutionary movement led by the Communist Party embraces the two stages, that is, the democratic and the socialist revolutions, which are two essentially different revolutionary processes. And the second, meaning the socialist, second process can be carried through only after the first has been completed. The democratic revolution is the necessary preparation for the socialist revolution, and the socialist revolution is the inevitable sequel to the democratic evolution. You get an idea why they emphasize this so much. Well, let's go back to John Adams, founding father. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. They understood what they're talking about. Here's Alexander Hamilton. It has been observed by an honorable gentleman that a pure democracy, if it were practicable, would be the most perfect government. The experience has proved that no position in politics is more false than this. The ancient democracies in which the people themselves deliberated never possessed one feature of good government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure, deformity. Here's G.K. Chesterton, an English writer, poet, philosopher, kind of a crusty curmudgeon in so many ways when he spoke about things, but he cut to the chase when it came to just statements that really need to be remembered. You can never have a revolution in order to establish a democracy. You must have a democracy in order to have a revolution. Going right along with Marx and Lenin and Mao, this is exactly where our country is being directed by our focus on democracy. In the Federalist Papers, there's many, many, many essays that review the difference between democracies and republics. I'm not going to talk about them too much. In fact, you'll probably be a little surprised at the one I picked because I'm going into number 14 instead of some of the others that probably, if you're familiar with this topic at all, you would have suggested. But just to use James Madison's brilliant mind on this, under the confusion of names, it has been an easy task to transfer to a republic observations applicable to a democracy only. America can claim the merit of making the discovery the basis of unmixed and extensive republics. Remember, states as well as the general government are republics. And if, in case there's any question about the intention of the Constitution Convention, early in the convention, Edmund Randolph got up and made this statement, that the purpose of the convention was to provide a cure for the evils under which the United States labored, that in tracing these evils to their origin, every man had found it in the turbulence and follies of democracy. Far cry from today. So in summary, the basis of our republic is law which applies to all, which is limited to a specific scope, and which protects all equally. It is a representative form of government in which our trusted representatives may only create laws within the bounds of authority, which was delegated to them by the United States Constitution. So, it has been a republic from the foundation. Every step they took in founding the nation and the government was taken in conformance to Republican principles. Democracy was not ever the driving principle of the foundation. Let's review just very briefly kind of the steps that it took to get this nation on its feet. The representatives, again, you'll see I've bolded and underlined and everything else throughout these next few slides, well, all of them actually. The representatives of the people in the states met in 1776 to determine the course of the nation. So in those meetings, out of those meetings came our Declaration of Independence. These trusted representatives declared the nation's independence. It never, at any time, was a democratic action in this effort to bring about the independence of the nation. When the 1787 Constitution Convention met, the delegates were the duly appointed representatives of the people in the states. The delegates were not democratically elected to these positions as representatives at the convention. They were appointed by the trusted representatives that had been previously selected by the people. Let's just look at Virginia, for example. Governor of Virginia appoints George Washington. He appoints James Madison. These people came at the appointment of other trusted representatives that the people had previously selected. So it was a representative form of government creating a representative to go to the convention. The government created under the Constitution is a Republican form of government. At no time does democracy enter into it. And it requires each state which enters the Union to be governed under the Republican form of government. So the Constitution, as it was originally established, created a form of government which is granted power to operate within a limited scope and bounds, and it had only specific enumerated powers beyond which it had not authority to operate. That is still the case, although they act way beyond those bounds. In addition to that, representatives are not empowered to exceed the powers granted to them. So it protects our liberty, proper government, and individual God-given rights. That's the basis of it. If we look back at the Declaration of Independence, we find that God gave individual rights, and it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. That's the principal purpose government was even created for. Let's look forward. The U.S. House was, and currently still is, elected democratically by the people. And they, by that action, become representatives themselves. The US Senate, prior to that egregious violation of the 17th Amendment, was appointed by the legislatures of the states. And the legislatures, as we all know, of the states are representative bodies. So the Senate became representatives of representatives. And their job was to temper and keep the democratically elected House of Representatives within proper bounds. So they were to be more statesmanlike. They were to have kind of the big picture view of how things were to be handled at the general government level, while recognizing that it gave the states a seat at the table. So the ratification process after the Constitution was written, it was never any type of element of democracy. The Constitution first, after the delegates to the convention signed it, went before the United States Congress, And again, they're the duly elected representatives of the people, not the people themselves. And after that, it was presented before a convention of delegates from each state who were chosen, trusted representatives of the people who had been selected by the people under the recommendation of the respective legislatures of each state. Again, representatives of the people, not the people directly. And as you can see from this train of thought, it's a far cry from how the only other constitution we've helped a nation write in the 21st century has been the Iraqi constitution. And you might remember the purple finger thing that they did if you came and you voted, and how the Congress adopted that as everybody in a form of unity was showing their purple finger. This is a far cry from what it went through to get our new constitution. In addition to that, just as a parenthetical note, as soon as the Iraqi constitution was ratified, I obtained 2 copies because it was written in Arabic. I don't speak Arabic or read it. And I wanted the translations. And what I found was absolutely shocking. Well, it wasn't really shocking. I expected it, but it was deeply saddening. We had helped write a constitution for a people that had none of the recognitions of individual God-given rights that are found in our constitution. It was and is a Soviet-style constitution. Right to keep and bear arms? Oh yeah, if you are a government agent. Nothing of the general population. Freedom of speech? Oh yeah, as long as you keep it within the limits expressed and created by law. That's not freedom of speech. Those are the kind of things that went into this Soviet-style constitution, and these are the kind of things that we could expect if someone went about rewriting our constitution in our day also. Okay, let's look at the amendment process for just a moment or two. Article 5 of the Constitution is also very Republican. 2/3 of the representatives of the people in the states propose amendments. They come out of the House and Senate. 3/4 of the states ratify the proposed amendment, either through their state legislative representatives or through representative delegates to state conventions, as Congress would choose. It does not, at any time, democratically put the matter before the body of the people for their approval or disapproval. That's how the amendment process is written into the United States Constitution. Again, a Republican form. So the Declaration recognizes that when any form of government becomes destructive of its proper purpose of securing God-given rights, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And the Article 5 of the Constitution was written to allow that option. So it's sacred and it was protected in our Constitution. So Article 5 amendment process allows trusted representatives to modify the Constitution and never by a democracy. So George Washington recognized the position of the Declaration of Independence, the process outlined in the Constitution. And in the farewell address, he said, the basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists till changed by an authentic and explicit act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. So it can't be changed by guess and by golly, can't be changed by court decree, it cannot be changed by simply passing legislation. There is nothing that allows it to be changed except by the Republican process outlined in the Constitution. So it's written in plain English. Those plain English words have meanings. Those meanings may be known. And by any logical stretch, they may only mean what they meant in the day they were written. So the founders considered the Constitution, and we can demonstrate this with many statements by them, to be a written binding contract. And so if we allowed the Constitution to be redefined to meet modern agendas, and we can redecide what those words mean, it can mean anything or nothing at all, and ultimately will destroy our Constitution by definitional drift. It could be mended out of existence without even coming close to the Article 5 process because we just redefine the words. So that appears to be what they're doing right now by this universal assault on this constitutional form that we've been so clearly set before us. It's funny how most Americans don't have a clue about the magnificence of our Constitution. Sometimes foreigners have a better perspective, and here's William Gladstone stating, the Constitution is the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man. So from the very foundation, it's a constitutional republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. Well, Utah's grassroots political process of the caucus meetings was designed to function at the most fundamental level as a republic. Utah, as has been stated before, has a caucus, well, it still does in a form, but it's being violated egregiously, had a process that was one of the most fundamental Republican forms of government that was from the very beginning of this great nation. In the caucus system, you and all your neighbors meet and choose your trusted representatives. Your trusted representatives. You are the one doing that. And they're to fulfill an assignment of selecting candidates who in turn, after their election, will act in their office as representatives. In the caucus system, everyone is invited to it and has the opportunity to attend and participate in the neighborhood caucuses. In the caucus meetings, all have a voice in the selection of the representatives who are charged with the responsibility to select others who will ultimately be candidates and become elected representatives. In the caucus system, in your neighborhood caucus, you know who those are nominated to represent you. In the caucus system, they're your neighbors. You choose them. You can oppose them. You can seek to become one of the trusted representatives and act as a delegate. And it's always has been the American way. At least it was until Senate Bill 54 that you've had some words about that you've reviewed in the past. When the Utah legislature created Senate Bill 54, they created a process that subverts the representative process. Under Senate Bill 54, the candidate can bypass the traditional trusted representative candidate selection. Historically, the trusted representatives of the people examine wannabe candidates, vetting their qualifications and principles. Just parenthetically, I may remark that if you are ever selected as a delegate at your caucus, you have a representative responsibility. It's your duty to go examine the candidates. It's your duty to vet them, if you will. Look at their principles, what they stand for, who they are, what their background is. You are to represent the people that elected you to that assignment. It's not a glad-handing assignment where people feel like, well, the only reason I got in this was to make certain that I at the convention voted for such and such or so-and-so. It's a responsibility to make certain that the proper principles are examined and carried forth. Historically, in Utah, the caucus convention system has inclined to be much more, if you will, conservative. I don't like the titles conservative and liberal and left and right and all that kind of stuff, but the traditional values are more traditionally held by those that go through the caucus process. And if you're going to be elected as at a caucus to become a delegate, I think it's important that you understand the position that you're in. It is not, as I say, a glad handing, I'm there only to help so-and-so get elected, but to examine the principles and foundation of every single one of those that you might be faced to vote for and make the correct decisions. And of course, report back to your constituency who are your neighbors. So today, under Senate Bill 54, candidates can pay signature gatherers. Now, if you're quite a well-to-do wannabe candidate, you pay $2, $3, $4, $5 a signature to get your number of signatures that you're needed to be able to place you on the ballot without going through the process of being eliminated or examined or put forth by trusted representatives that have been sent there as delegates. Again, trusted representatives, the Republican form. Senate Bill 54 encourages well-funded individuals with name recognition to seek direct access to the ballot and thereafter, through a superficial marketing hype driven campaign, obtain election without even facing critical examination by representatives that have historically examined their qualifications and their principles. And by the way, I might just give a little historical perspective that won't take too long, but all of this came out of the election, the campaign, or the convention, if you want to call it, that threw Bob Bennett out of office in the spring of 2010. He had demonstrated so many violations of principle that the people in the convention said, no, we don't want him going back to be our senator again. Unheard of for a sitting senator, 18 years, to be dumped by his party at a convention. Bob Bennett found out in the spring of 2010 that he was not going to be the senator next time around. And he was a lame duck senator from spring until January. And as is often the cases with lame ducks, that this is a case against term limits, he let his true colors shine. He didn't have to answer to anybody. And he showed the left turn, if you will, that he took in order to be able to feather his nest with other interesting constituencies. Boy, the establishment was totally shocked. Appalled, shocked, and chagrined would probably be an understatement. They had lost a sure thing in the Senate. And they didn't want that to happen again. So the logs started rolling. They were looking for a way for someone that had name recognition and deep pockets to be able to go back in again. Well, it took until the 2018 election when Orrin Hatch quit running. And again, he was a sure thing for the establishment for all the years he was in. When he quit running, they got a candidate that was able to come in because of the way that the establishment had changed the qualification process. And Mitt Romney was able to say, I don't need that convention to endorse me. I'm well known here from my Olympic stuff and my religious affiliation and my face and my money and everything else like that. He bypassed all of this vetting process, got enough signatures, got put on the ballot, and he was elected for 6 years. And elections have consequences. And we're finding that out. And I think this year we're going to find out again how the establishment would really like how things to go again. At any rate, Senate Bill 54 did away with that Republican form of representation and vetting. So this representative republic is under attack by those who wish to destroy our tried and proven representative form of government and move it closer to a democracy. There's a direct primary election process created by Senate Bill 54. It turns the elections over to well-funded, campaigning opportunists who appeal to the masses through superficial Madison Avenue type campaigns. It's interesting. We look at the campaigns today. We find people that are just custom made to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and check all the boxes. And this whole process virtually reassures the reelection of incumbents, and it can be manipulated to make certain that some establishment favored individual has a real shot at regaining a seat. That's one of the many reasons why so many of the incumbents and career politicians today from both major political parties supported this Senate Bill 54 change. Okay, once our current caucus system's abandoned, we can be assured that well-funded candidates with the most marketing money will always prevail. They can afford the advertising and media exposure, even when more worthy, underfunded candidates are available. And by the way, we've seen in the past where sometimes there'll be someone that really impresses the delegates to the convention and shows that the people that are trusted representatives can make a decision on their own rather than just going with the establishment. So abandoning the caucus system will assure us that money buys the office, and we'll end up with the tyranny of the mass marketers to the masses, and the principle will be further subverted by clever sounding bites with patriotic music and American flags in the background. I'm old enough now to have lived long enough to see and hear that sweet talk that leads to victory almost never changes the direction of government. We need to start looking for sound, principled people to sit in our government seats. There's going to be more fluffy, pandering, political drivel. There'll be less substance. And I would ask you, is that what you want as we go forward in America? This caucus system needs to be restored. We need to recognize that it was designed for a way to preserve the nation, to preserve our republic, and that those that sit in those seats really do have a responsibility to fulfill that representative call that they're given by their neighbors. So the Senate Bill 54, people call the advocates of the Senate Bill 54 call it outdated. It's one of the few remaining vestiges of the original way American politics worked when principle was promoted over party. It's one more nail in the coffin of America's original liberty, and so we need to return to the grassroots system. We'll leave it there for tonight.
Thank you, Scott. That was awesome. It was, yeah, that was really powerful, foundational. I put a link in the chat, or a take action link that you guys can share around on that. And I'd like to open it for questions for anybody on that presentation.
When I first moved into my community 30 some years ago, nobody knew me. I went to the first caucus meeting that we had after we got there. And I presented the concept in much more brief format than I just did, with the idea that, see, there were people there that were absolutely determined that their person, they were going to get there. They'd be brought by people that were kind of feathering the nest of a certain individual. And I spoke, they asked me who I was supporting. I said, I'm going to examine every one of them for principle and for character and for their ability to keep our liberty. And there were people in the other room that were counting the votes that were being turned in. We had a very, very large caucus. It was a very active election year. And one of the women that was in there before said, what did you say? Everybody voted for you. And that's what needs to happen, is there needs to be an exposure of the responsibility. This is not a check the boxes, cut and dried, we're going into this. That's what the original Electoral College was about. It was not about picking somebody that was popular or whatever. They wanted the best individual for the job that would be a president for everyone. And that's how it was designed to be. And they were to pick for electors those that were trusted, wise individuals that could do that. And honestly, democracy is not a good solution. And in my book, I cover a little bit of the different forms of government. And we talk about how sometimes very narrow margins are decided based upon the eloquence of somebody, and the wrong decisions are made. And that's what this is to prevent. And if you went out and signed a petition for Mitt Romney, let's just say, he chose unwisely. I can't imagine why someone would want to help the demise of the nation. And I can't tell you how many times I've been contacted with people that say, boy, how do we get rid of Mitt Romney? I said, did you vote for him? They said, well, yeah, but he deceived me. And I say, well, no, you didn't do your homework. If you'd done your homework, you would have known he was pro-abortion in 1970, 3 years before Roe v. Wade. You would have known he was the godfather of same-sex marriage. You would have known that he was the godfather of Obamacare, only it was Romney Care in Massachusetts. I mean, I can go down the litany of things that happened. They say, well, yeah, but he did such a great job with the Olympics. Holy Hannah. I mean, that's the problem if people don't do their homework, and we, the people, are responsible for that. We, the people, are responsible for the kind of government we get. And we've got the kind of government we got, and we got to try and change it with some educational processes. And I know you guys are all involved in that. Well, it's principles they need to know. The principles are very simple. I'm a very, very simple individual. And somebody asked me earlier today about something. I'd been on the radio, And the radio host, who was extremely different from me in this terms of his politics, he had made a statement. He said, "Bradley, you know, I love having you on because you're so predictable." And I said, "Thank you." I says, "Because the principles are stable, they're immovable. And if you have the slightest idea what the principle is, you can predict where I'm going to be. And I would like to be predictable because that's the way it's designed. You don't drift in the wind." And so anyway, I took it as a compliment.